Well, hello and welcome back. I am Guy Stevens with the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint. You are here with us at the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint live series. Excited to have you here today. Always excited to have you here and joining us for these conversations. We've got a great show in store for you today. Those of you that may not be familiar with who we are, the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint was started almost 5 years ago. In fact, we've got a 5-year anniversary coming up here very soon. Started 5 years ago, initially really focused on the issue of restraint and seclusion happening in schools across the country. Our mission has continued to grow. It's not just across the country, it's across the world. It's not just restraint and seclusion. It's restraint, seclusion, suspension, expulsion, corporal punishment. It's the school to prison pipeline. It's the many things that are often done to children and youth in the name of behavior. And it's really about trying to make a positive difference, making a difference through better laws and policies, through education, through knowing better and ultimately doing better. Really excited today to have a guest with us, Jamie Emberson, who I feel like I've known for quite a while here. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about Jamie in a moment, but he's here to share kind of professional experience and personal experience and a story I think that that will be really impactful. Do want to let you know that, as always, that our live events are recorded. So when we do these, they are not only live on Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, and on Twitter. You can also go back after the fact and listen to them on any of those platforms. You can watch them on those platforms. We also make an audio-only podcast available, so you can listen to it on the go if you'd like to. You can download that from Spotify or Apple Music, wherever you happen to listen to podcasts. Do want to let you know that, as I've mentioned on previous shows, we have a couple of amazing sponsors that are helping us to bring this podcast to you. Of course, it takes a lot of time, energy, and effort, and we've got a couple of incredible sponsors that are helping us to do this work. I want to introduce you first to a sponsor, Supportable Solutions, who has been an annual sponsor this year and helping us with the podcast. Supportable Solutions is run by my friend and colleague, Connie Persick, who has done some amazing work. Recently developed something called the Why Toolkit, which has been launched and is now available. It's really kind of getting to the deeper why of behavior. Let me share with you quickly an ad from Connie about the toolkit.
Connie Persick has created leading-edge work as she has transformed the traditional behavior support plan and functional behavior assessment. Connie's updated FBA and BIP process combines the most recent research-based approaches in a way that resonates with parents and educators. The Why Toolkit is the ultimate testament of the value of human connection over compliance. The Why Toolkit, cutting-edge behavioral supports for the present day. Rethink, reframe, reimagine. When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change.
My toolkit is out there and available, and you can go and maybe Courtney can throw that link in the chat as well, but you can go and you can check out the Why Toolkit. It's a great tool to really help get to the deeper why behavior, and it's actually been shown in some pilot studies to help reduce and eliminate restraint and seclusion, so that's always a really positive thing. Also want to introduce you to Blue Jack Kids, who is another one of our sponsors that's doing some amazing work. Let me share with you the ad. I actually had an opportunity recently at a conference to meet with the owner, who's a wonderful person doing some really impactful work. Are you looking for a trauma-informed social-emotional learning program? Look no further. Blue Jack Kids has created an amazing collection of SEL videos with ready-to-use lesson plans and activity worksheets. The Trauma-Informed Educators Network had a chance to review the content, and this is what they said. We love that Blue Jack Kids incorporates neuroscience to help students understand their brains and emotions. The videos are so well done with a clear focus on diversity, belonging, and inclusion. Video collections are appropriate for elementary ages. If you want to get started, go to bluejackkids.com and you can use the code SEL10 for a 10% discount on a year subscription. Check them out. Blue Jack Kids and Supportable Solutions helping to sponsor the podcast and bring this to you. So now, get ready for our guest here. But before we bring up our guest, I want to ask you to do what I always ask you to do, which is if you are watching live, and I know a number of you are watching live right now, if you're watching live, let us know in the chat who you are and where you're from. It's always fantastic to see where people are coming to us from. I love to see all the familiar names that we see, week after week when we do the program. It's always really amazing also to see that we reach people from across the world. And of course, reaching across the world is a great lead into our guest today. And let me go ahead and tell you a little bit about our guest, and we're going to go into a great presentation. So Jamie, I was trying to think, Jamie, how long we've been connected. It seems like it's been a couple of years. It must have been. And I think, at one point we connected and we had some conversations. Probably at one point said, hey, I got to have you on for a live. So excited to have you here. And I'm going to tell folks a little bit about who you are. And of course, we're going to have an opportunity for you to kind of present and share a bit of your story and experience. So you have an extensive, years of both lived and professional expertise across diverse roles in healthcare, social care, and well-being. Your career has encompassed positions such as care worker, nurse, clinical nurse specialist, nurse tutor, companies, director, departmental directorship, consultant, and performance coach. Jamie's personal values and practices have been shaped by his own life experiences, including early memory at age 5 of his brother, Garry, and his peers referring to themselves as freedom fighters while detained in secure facilities. Later in life, he found the meaning of life. Meaning of this, rather. And throughout his long career, Jamie has focused on leadership, development, systemic and organizational approaches, resulting in notable outcomes like reducing and eliminating restricted practices and enhancing people's quality of life and well-being. His current passion revolves around positive psychology, interventions, and strength-based approaches, which he applies to enhancing the well-being of others. Jamie's particularly interested in aiding those suffering from trauma and stress. Outside of his professional pursuits, which certainly sound like enough to keep you busy, Jamie is the father to Ali, who also works in the well-being field. He shares his life with his dog Hendrix and nurtures a parcel of ancient woodland to promote biodiversity. My son would be all about that. Nature holds a special place in his heart, and he has explored mountains both in the UK and Indian Himalayas. Jamie's culinary interests lean towards Asian cuisine, and he finds joy in cooking. We should have made this a cooking show. But I think I would have had to come out there and try some of that. So, Jamie, let me just get right to it and say welcome and thank you so much for being here today.
Hey, Guy, thanks so much. And you're always welcome to join us for a tasty meal. So,
it sounds like a good plan. I don't have any travel plan. Well, actually, I got to share my daughter. We were talking about sometime taking a daddy-daughter trip, and she brought up going to England, and I thought, well, you never know. So, that kind of thing might happen. You never know.
Well, you're going to get a warm welcome if you come. That's for sure.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. So I do want to encourage people that are watching live, again, tell us who you are and where you're from in the chat. See already, Jamie, a couple of people have jumped in here and told us who they are and where they're from. Say we've got Davina here. Hey, I haven't been able to join in so long. Here from Connecticut. Love your organization. Chantel in Canada. Well, actually, I know that you're in Florida today. Chantel is actually the lead Canadian volunteer for the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint from New Brunswick, but is actually in Florida today, a Canadian in Florida. And I'm sure we'll have other people jumping on here to tell us who they are as well. But you are going to share with us today a bit of a presentation, and we're going to also just kind of have a conversation. And, you and I have had a couple of conversations before. This will probably be much like some of the other talks that we've had, just that we'll be sharing this with some others that are joining us today. So, and look at this. We've got somebody here from New Zealand, from Auckland. Anna, great to see you here. Fantastic member of our community here at the Alliance. So, it's funny because, when we started all of these, I would have never imagined that people from all over the world would be tuned in, much less connected. I mean, the fact that, you and I connected at some point and are able to share experiences and ideas and thoughts about how to make the world a better place. That's what this is all about. So with that, I know you have a presentation ready for us, and I'm actually going to bring your presentation up on the screen. And you and I talked about you doing a presentation, and I'm going to vanish while you do your presentation. So it's just going to be you. And then I'm going to come back when you're done. And of course, if you need anything in the meantime, you are welcome to just call my name, and I'll pop up like a genie, and I'll share with you one other hello here. Neurodivergent Infinity Network of Educators is here, which is fantastic. I love that. So I'm going to go ahead and hand the reins off to you, let you take it over, and just know that if you need anything, I'll be here. And as you conclude your presentation, we'll take some questions from people that are watching live. And you know how this works. I'll probably have a bunch of questions too. So it's always a fun conversation. So let me go ahead and hand it off to you, Jamie.
Look forward to that very much. Yeah.
All right.
Sure.
Sounds good. Well, it is all you. I'm going to disappear and you can take it away.
Thanks, Guy. See you later.
All right.
Well, hi, everybody, and wonderful to be with you. I particularly love engaging in anything about our work and that strives towards one, increasing people's quality of life and reducing any form of restrictive practice and violation of human rights. I'm going to jump straight in. Before I do, I just would like to sort of make a disclaimer in a sense, and that's really just to bring to people's attention that this brief presentation that we're about to go on a journey on is of my sort of personal lived experiences within sort of supporting and advocating for my brother. And some of the material that we're going to cover is pretty hard hitting. So I do just want to bring that to your attention and make sure that you're kind of looking after yourselves and just being aware of any sort of thoughts and feelings that you might be having whilst you're viewing and listening to the presentation. So look after yourselves. Thanks. Okay, so it's a story. We're going to go on a brief story, and I'd like to show you my wonderful brother. So this is Garry, and here's a collection of sort of, beautiful, wonderful photographs. Garry had intellectual disabilities and autism, so he's autistic, and Down syndrome. In addition to those strengths, he also had many other strengths. And you can see there on the bottom left, that's me as a younger man looking up to my brother Garry. I always looked up to him and still do. He was a great inspiration. And you can see in the center at the bottom there, it might be a bit difficult to see, so I'm going to enlarge that for you. There's a cutting from a paper, but just for a moment, just take a moment to look at the beautiful photographs. And of course, there's some really lovely scenes there, and the wonderful smile that he's got, and he's with my mother and father, so in the center, and really beautiful photographs. And here's the enlarged part of that cutting. I really want to kind of jump in now to the theme of the presentation. So Garry was nearly died in a hospital, which is where he lived at the time. And this is kind of going back to the 80s. And my mother on the right there accused the hospital of kind of abuse and neglect. Now, I'd like to draw your attention to the bottom right, underneath my mother's photo. And the journalist at the time put the word battling mother. And that particularly resonates with me because since then, I've worked with lots of families, lots of relatives, brothers, sisters, aunts, mums and dads. And the battling is very true. Often it is like a battle, and like on the front of a war where there are battles going on, there are high prevalences of trauma. And I have to be honest, I myself have suffered from trauma. And once again, being honest, I don't think I've ever yet met any other relative that's had to advocate for their loved one and sometimes witness and sometimes have to go into battle that doesn't then, as a result, suffer from some form of trauma. And that's particularly relevant because I think the people that we're referring to that are being supported, whether or not they've got, whether or not they're autistic or whatever, they're people that actually have probably in some way or other suffered trauma. And we know that trauma is something that 90% of us are likely to experience a traumatic event. And we're all in it together. And behaviours of concern, I know that there are different terms of references. Some people use challenging behaviour, behaviours of concern. I personally like to use the term distressed behaviour. And distressed behaviours are symptoms of trauma. And the responses to trauma require a responsibility. And to flip the narrative of that, an ability to respond. My respected colleague, Ellie Chappell, do check her out. She's on YouTube. And again, somebody with lived experience. And it's an ability to respond. So distress behaviour and trauma, in my view, are associated, and that people who show distress behaviour are, kind of more likely than average to have been exposed to trauma. Okay, not always the case, but I would put that out there. And there's evidence that distress behaviour is a symptom of trauma, and we need to look at that outside the box. We need to place our trauma lens on. And we need to increase our awareness and empathy, and not only have that awareness and empathy, but actually put that into practice. Looking through a trauma lens, one of the references that I'd like to make, which is certainly what I use in my own work, is the Indicative Trauma Impact Manual. And it's a non-diagnostic trauma-informed guide to emotion, thought and behaviour. It kind of puts it in a different context. And if we need to move away from a medical model, which is something that I am suggesting, along with many other people, and we need to go down a non-pathologisation model, we need to look and dig deeper to establish some of the causes. And those are the things that we try and need to change, not people's behaviours. So again, looking through a trauma lens, it's kind of, not so much what's wrong with you, it's what's happened to you. When we talk about the trauma-informed practice or trauma-informed approaches, I think it's really important, in my experience, that we consider that as a framework to practice from. It's not a tick box exercise. It's a cultural aspect. I'd like to go back to my brother, just to kind of put a lot of this into context for you. My brother used to play the harmonica. That was his main method of communication. He used to also tap climbing frames, either with the mouth organ or indeed with sticks. And it was like playing the drums. So Garry was very sort of musical. And indeed, that kind of musical passion then lent itself to the piano that used to be in a main hall of close nearby to where he lived, in the grounds of where he was living. And he used to go there daily. He had his routine. And when Garry played the piano that was in the hall, or the mouth organ, or from the drumming of the climbing frame, you know, it kind of be in that flow. It'd be kind of really be lost in the zone. He'd be happy. He had positive emotion. He was engaging. Unfortunately, on one occasion, they shut the doors. And the reason for that was because they were having a dignitary event with mayors and mayoresses. And they put a grand piano on the stage and locked the door. And of course, when Garry went, that was a change in his routine. He was obviously restricted to be able to do some of the things that he wanted to do, like play the piano. So Garry actually broke the doors down of the hall. And as a protest, he actually pushed the grand piano off of the stage. Now, okay, maybe a little bit regretful. I would, you know, kind of maybe a misdemeanor, maybe. Not exactly a major criminal offence, and perhaps completely explainable and understandable as to why he may have done that, given that for a very long time prior to that, he had free access to the hall and the piano that he so loved. What then happened as a result of that was that my brother got 15 years in a secure unit without trial, without consideration of his sort of human rights. And during that time in the secure unit, he had a pretty tough time. I know he had a tough time because I also started to have involvement with that secure unit. And there were not only human rights violations, but there was systemic torture and abuse. So I said I was involved. I was. I myself was excluded from school at a very early age. I was excluded from school at 15. And for 3 years, I took a job in the unit where my brother was. It was male-only staff. My induction was being locked in with 18 men in a room. What they didn't realise was they were actually my mates, because I've known them for most of my life because of my brother. So, yeah. Whilst I was there, I witnessed high use of unregulated seclusion, medication, physical abuse, tying people up. One of the practices was starving people and then stripping people and then throwing bread in stinging nettles, and just having a bit of a laugh watching people being dehumanized and tortured. Bath times, 18 people, 2 baths, no change of water. Teeth cleaning. I remember I call it the white stripe. After people had their teeth cleaned, they'd get a stripe off the toothbrush down their nose, which indicated to everybody else that they'd had their teeth done and that they were ready to have a face wash. Unbelievable. Oppression and brutality was the leadership. I raised safeguarding concerns. I was beaten up and victimised. I had a car burnt. I then went on to do my nursing and qualified as a nurse because I thought that would empower me, and also did various other training. And whilst I was a nurse, I raised, under my professional code of conduct, a conscientious objector against human rights violations. And interestingly enough, whilst I wasn't beaten up because of that, and whilst I didn't have a car burn, I was still victimised. It was a systemic victimisation. So the headlines and takeaways for me at this point is really that the human species is a repetitive culture, including behaviours and systems and policies of failure. We need to look no further than Ukraine and Russia. Sometimes the only thing that we learn from history is that we don't learn through history. So with good intentions, we shut institutions, but then through ignorance, social, economical, politics, and mindless policy repeated institutional practices in smaller, scattered and community settings. You see, institutional abusive practices are not confined to institutions. It's wherever there is poor leadership and poor cultures. And as a means of justification and our floundering search for kind of meaning and purpose, and we change the name of what we're doing, and it's to continue doing what we're doing anyway that wasn't working. So I, in the 90s, set up my own support organisation. And my brother at this point was kind of in transition from leaving hospitals to going into the community. And my brother, I'll just go back a bit. My brother was in a private care. Well, it doesn't matter if it's private or not, but he was in a care home where there was poor culture, poor leadership. And my brother was the recipient of unregulated medication again, unregulated restraint, unregulated seclusion. His mouth organ used to be taken away. Now, remember what I said earlier, please. My brother's harmonica was his main method of communication, and they used to take it away as a punishment. So what I did on one occasion, despite the fact that I tried to go through the system of finding him a better alternative placement, was supported by a couple of my friends, I turned up at midnight one evening because I was informed that he was being increasingly more severely abused. And I took him out. I took him out to a safe place. Now, interestingly, I was accused of kidnap by the authorities. Now, I'm not suggesting for one moment that it was kidnap. From my perspective, his human rights were being abused. So I decided a counterclaim against the authority for a breach of his human rights. And I'm pleased to say that that resulted in a significant payment in our favour, which then was significant in being able to purchase my brother a house, of which he then moved into. So for me, the house that Garry moved to, my brother, was also part of the organisation that I set up at the time. And for me, the leadership, and when I talk about leadership, I'm talking about organisational and practice leadership. It's significant that we've got to have kindness, and it's got to be led by leadership. You know, we've got to be human, being with others versus doing to others. I'll move on. Here are some interesting, also what I would call strengths that we need to have. I'll be talking in a moment about some of the positive psychology techniques and strategies that we're using for strengths-based approaches. But interestingly, these are called inner development goals, and this actually has got kind of nothing to do with our field of work, which is fantastic. It's to do with people, and this is part of the United Nations work with regards to sustainable development goals. And you can check inner development goals out, which include 24 strengths that you've got in front of you now. So I'll talk about strengths-based approaches. Here are some strength correlations with sustainable leadership. And if you kind of put that into context of leadership and what we're doing within our work, those particular character strengths that you've got there are just beautiful, aren't they? And kindness is a character strength from the virtue of humanity. And I won't go into reading that. You can see the definition, essence, and action. And we need more of that, right? So character strengths. Character strengths comes from the field of positive psychology, and they're stable, universal personality traits that manifest themselves through thinking, our cognitions, feelings, the affect and emotion, willingness, volition, and our action, our behaviour. And character strengths can be viewed as a pathway to well-being. Again, there's another 10 correlations with kindness. And there's a reference on the bottom there, bottom right, character strengths interventions, which are strengths-based interventions that come from Ryan Nemec of the VIA Character Institute. And you can look at their website and get more information about sort of well-being and character strengths. And the thing about kindness and any other character strengths is that they're expressed in combinations with other character strengths, and they're interdependent and interconnected with other character strengths. So there's kind of like an interbeing between character strengths. So even if you try to use a single character strength, it's likely that another character strength would come along for the ride anyway. And don't forget, we've all got these character strengths. There's 24 character strengths, and we've all got them. And they're all positive. Character strengths are part of wellbeing approaches. And I'd just like to make a distinction here between what wellbeing approaches are not compatible with. So wellbeing approaches are not compatible with compliance-based approaches, nor aversive approaches, nor sole focus on reductions of behaviours of concern or reducing restrictive practices. In fact, the evidence is if we have a sole focus on that, it doesn't necessarily increase well-being. We've got to intentionally want to support an increase in well-being. Wellbeing approaches are not compatible with deficit-based approaches or the medical disease model, the pathologization model. And wellbeing approaches are not compatible with dysfunctional social economic policy and segregation, continuing marginalisation, inhumane unkindness, social injustice, segregation, lip service, and tick boxes. What wellbeing approaches are compatible with is connection and relationships, hope, strengths-based approaches, trauma-informed, polyvagal, somatic approaches, dysregulated nervous system, interpersonal neurobiology, intentional neuroplasticity when we're talking about the work of Laurie DeSaltles, increasing quality of life, self and co-regulation, human rights, empowerment, sharing the power, low arousal approaches, and happiness. I don't think I've got time. I'm just being mindful of time. I don't think I've got time to particularly go through that in detail. But I'd just like to point out that, you know, the window of tolerance, something that you're probably familiar with. You know, one of our aspirations and intentions is to increase our window of tolerance. The things on the right-hand side in the bigger green box are the kind of things that we can use to increase our window of tolerance. And us too. You know, again, this is not about stuff that we're doing to other people. We're all in this together. So through our organisational and practice leadership and using our trauma lens, we need to create a healing architecture which deepens our shared humanity. We're all part of this kind of healing mechanism, and we do have the power for collective transformation. We can all play our part with our responsibility and ability to respond in ways that provide leadership to promote healing, trauma growth, and resilience. We need to be practical and simplistic about that. Lead people, educate, show, coach, mentor to empower our new generations of leaders. Trauma-informed care and approaches and practices and strengths-based approaches are the foundation of our shared humanity. That is the well-being. I'm going to move on from that. I'd just like to mention about the low arousal approach, developed by Andy McDonald from Studio 3. You can check that out on www.studio3.org. And it kind of speaks for itself there. It's about self-regulation and co-regulation. The PERMA model is something that I and colleagues use in a fluid sense, not a prescriptive one. Here's a PERMA plan that people can have a bit of fun with and identify and fill out the things that are a part of that. There's an H been added to this by Michelle McQuaid, actually. We actually ourselves have broke the health component down into 5 different areas: exercise, sleep, healthy eating, primary health care, and stress management. Applying the PERMA on a day-to-day basis can be a bit of fun if it's not taken too seriously. So, you know, for individual plans for people, there needs to be active support and inclusivity. They need to be co-produced. The P&Es, the positive emotions and engagement, can be used as distractors because they're pleasant, nice things. And that can, as we know, interrupt sort of distressed behaviours and so on. We can develop relationships and meaning and purpose. And organisationally, looking at it from a wellbeing perspective, I'm involved with an organisation in the UK called Changing Lives Building Dreams, CLBD. And we've been running workshops for people, both people with disability or strengths, as I'd like to challenge, but you know, people with strengths and also people that are paid to support people, and we're all in it together. And we run wellbeing workshops where we might do sort of exercises that might include yoga, polyvagal theory, breathing exercises, and other activities and exercises related to well-being and positive psychology and character strengths. We develop leadership career pathway as an alternative to typical management pathway. Stress management for all of us, and the inclusion of strengths-based approaches. So collectively, we can engage and form relationships that have the purpose of changing culture and practice from a deficit model to a strengths-based model that accepts, accommodates, and welcomes our differences. And well-being approaches are such a pathway. As a consequence, our collective well-being may well be enjoyed together rather than our collective suffering and trauma. Thanks very much for listening, and love to take any questions or hear any comments that you may have. Thanks very much.
Make sure my mic is actually turned on. Well, thank you. And just before we get rid of your presentation, I'll just share that your contact information is on there in terms of your email address. And of course, you're on LinkedIn, and it looks like Instagram, and there's other contact information there. So we'll leave that up for a moment if anybody wants to get that contact information, and then we'll make it go away so you can see me again and I can see you. Go back to that last quote for me for a second. That quote that you left us with, as a consequence of our collective well-being, may well be enjoyed together rather than our collective suffering trauma. Wow, that's such a impactful quote. I read that and it just kind of sinking in. Yeah, thank you. All right, I'm going to make your presentation here disappear, so it's just you and I. And I appreciate you sharing kind of your story and your thoughts and your ideas. I do want to encourage people that are watching live now, you're welcome to share in the chat if you have questions or comments. And just want to share a couple things with you here real quickly before I begin kind of asking you a couple of things. We had somebody here from Australia as well join on, so really great international audience here. And Chantel shared, "I'm sorry for all that your brother endured. This was a wonderful and very on-point presentation. This is exactly where we need to be." Yeah, fantastic.
Thank you.
So, I do thank you for sharing this and understanding, these stories and this trauma. You hit it early on about kind of the impact of the experiences that we have often supporting our loved ones and people that we're really trying to make a positive difference for, but how we can be impacted by that and impacted by the trauma of systems. And I think it's very on point for our audience here, who many of whom have found themselves in situations where they have loved ones that they're supporting that have been subjected to some really horrific things. And I appreciate you sharing your personal story. I'm wondering, kind of thinking back to Garry's experience. Some of this occurred. How many years ago was it that some of these things occurred?
Well, this was a strange thing, really, Guy, because obviously when he was, let's say, in the institution, that was sort of his early life up till sort of late 80s. But the point I was making in the presentation, of course, is that because the policy of community care and the shutting of institutions, and
Right.
rightly so, but in fact the institutional practice and the abuse went with him into the community.
Right.
So that was the kind of point I was making about the abusive and institutional practice is not confined to institutions. It occurs. It's like a bad seed that grows in the absence of positive culture and positive leadership. There's leadership, okay,
Right.
but the leadership is poor.
Right. Right, right. And I think you were heading exactly where my mind was here, which is, as you said through the presentation, but looking today at where things are, unfortunately, well, I was going to ask you, but I mean, what are your thoughts? I mean, looking around today versus where we are, and of course realizing that some of these things continue to persist, and they're called different things, and I mean, what are your feelings, and then, well, share with me first your feelings on kind of how things.
Sure. Well, a respected colleague of ours contacted me last night. Andy McDonald. I know he's been on your program.
Yeah, in fact, we just set up a meeting earlier this week because we haven't talked in a while. I'm like, I haven't talked to Andy in forever. So, yeah.
Right. Well, I was talking to Andy yesterday. Now, the reason we were talking, Andy had sent me a clip, and it was an advertisement for a mechanical restraint device that's being promoted to enable people to be able to use this mechanical device to get somebody into seclusion. Now, we've been campaigners, and not just myself. There's many of us, thankfully, that are campaigners, including yourselves, including the Restraint Reduction Network related to the, British Institute of Learning Disabilities. So there's a huge movement. Now, I think it's concerning because I don't know about in the US. I think I've got a pretty good finger on the pulse of what's happening out there. But certainly in the UK, we go from one scandal to the next, to the next, to the next. But I do think, so that's kind of how that's my...
And we're on that conveyor belt too, my friend. I mean, the story, our news alerts every day. I mean, there was a story out of, I think, Pennsylvania the other day of a kid being zip tied and duct taped to a chair. I mean, these things, yeah.
I mean, we know what it is, right?
Right.
Yeah. Now, having said all of that, using one of the character strengths that I think is so important, which is hope, and another character strength such as perseverance, I think my observations, and certainly, I don't think it's just about my connections. I think generally speaking, and I've been in this work a long time, right? I think I can't ever remember a time whereby there does seem to be a collective movement that's taking into account people's differences, that's taking into account people's human rights, that's taking into account, real serious intentions, including training and qualifications around reducing restrictive practices, trauma-informed practice. I can't ever remember a time where that's been, quite frankly, so positively going forward. So whilst I think, yes, there are the really, sad, annoying and let's face it, frustrating negative examples, I think equally there's some really positive examples out there too. And we need to develop the take-up of that by developing our new generation of leaders to take that forward in a more positive, quicker direction than it's taken so far, certainly in my lifetime.
So I have to give you credit here. You seem to be a mind reader, because I think you went with your response there really was going to get to my next question, which is like, what gives you hope? What gives you hope? And I agree with you. And, I mean, it's a fantastic world today that we can connect with people from across the world that are united in this work. And I think about, I think about you. I think about, Andy, I think about Gareth Morewood and folks over at Studio 3 in the UK. And you mentioned Ellie earlier. I think about all the people there. I think about the people that we have on here right now live with us from Australia and New Zealand, where there's a lot of work being done. And that does give me hope. One of the things that really gives me, I think, more hope than almost anything else is the growth in the movement from self-advocacy communities, from the autistic self-advocates, from neurodivergent self-advocates, from people out there that are really doing some amazing work. And of course, it's always, how can we amplify that work? How can we, stand together in all of that? And to me, that's some of the most powerful, the story of lived experience, the voice of lived experience, absolutely the most important voice at the table. And I love to see the growth 100%. Of that. And yeah. So some great things happening. So I got a couple comments that I want to share here, but I appreciate that, because you were heading exactly where my thought was, which is like, isn't it overwhelming that some of these things haven't changed and continue to happen? And there's horrific stories, but I would agree, it is a hopeful moment when we can begin to come together across the world. And I mean, it's so energizing to meet people like the community that we have here. Just amazing people that are, I see some of the names that are popping up in the chat now, people that are out there like fighting for change and doing things to make a difference, really. So, and with that, I'll transition to Chantel, who's one of those people out there that is pushing for change. Chantel says, New Brunswick school system is hailed as being one of the most inclusive education systems in the world, yet restraint, seclusion, suspension, expulsion run rampant, particularly with children with complex needs. So sometimes even the systems that are, kind of held up as examples are doing a lot of things that are causing a lot of harm.
Yeah. And the origin for that is the mindset.
Right.
It's just, not only is it just around kind of like compliance.
Right. Yeah.
But it's around, the very simple question as to, why people do what they're doing. And it for me, it's like this need for people to then approach that from a medical model, deficit model. Right. And going back positively, I think for me, one of the most hopeful things that I'm observing, certainly in my own work, and in particular with organisations that I'm connected to, is you got to look at it through different lens. You've got to look at it from their people's life experiences, that neurodivergent, and just that in itself can lead to living in a world that's set up for people that are not neurodivergent, can result in trauma, right?
Right. This is something that I talk about a lot with friends and colleagues, is this idea that, the intersection between trauma and disability, and just being neurodivergent in a neurotypical world that wants to create everyone and make them the same itself is trauma. Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's without everything else happening.
Right. Let me get to a couple more comments here. Anna said, thank you for sharing your brothers and your story. Disability and trauma are very real. So important to take the individual's trauma history into account when supporting children, youth, and adults.
Yeah. Thank you, Anna, and totally agree. Yeah.
Nicole from Montclair, New Jersey. I agree that we continually hear of insane things happening to children in schools. We need to demand that these districts get more PD on this topic. Yeah. And a lot of this, I mean, even beyond PD, it's changing mindsets, right? I mean, so some of these things are not some of these things are not as difficult as people sometimes think they are. I mean, just the simple act of changing your mindset, changing the way you look at things. I mean, I always love the quote from Stuart Shanker, see a child differently, see a different child. See anybody differently, see a different person, right? And so often that's necessary. I have another comment here from Marion. In thinking of the experience of cumulative trauma for carers and support staff who care for individuals who have their own trauma experience over time, how best to think about this dynamic, supporting the system around vulnerable individuals. So any thoughts on that in terms of, and again, there's a lot of very caring, supportive, people out there. While we know the horror stories, we also know that there are people out there that are doing so much. And of course, that compassion and that support can
And
play a
compassion
toll.
fatigue, right?
That's right. That's right. Yep. Yep. There you
Yeah.
go. Reading minds again. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly.
So, for me, I mean, boy, I wish I had the answer for that. But I think, certainly from my perspective, I think it's a great question, number one. Number two, I think that, again, it's not necessarily about us complicating it. And again, I'll go back to the thing that we're all in this together. And, maybe we need to do intentional well-being plans, strategies, having workshops for people that need to look after themselves better. And because one of the things, I don't know what your viewers would feel, but certainly my own experience, and this is personal as well as a professional one, is that even those of us that are really great at looking after other people don't do such a good job at looking after ourselves. And for me, I think it's got to begin with self-compassion, and I find that difficult. For me, I've been a carer all of my life. I've got my, if you like, my purpose and meaning of my life through caring from a very, very early age. And I need to really work hard at looking after myself and making sure that by looking after myself, I can then continue to look after other people. Because if you don't look after yourself, how on earth are you going to look after other people?
Yeah,
we've got to put more, we've got to put resources into it, right? We've got to put more resources into it, and again, we need to pressure through campaigning and so on and so forth.
Well, you started that by saying that you didn't have an answer, but you gave a very good answer. And some of it comes to exactly what you were talking about today, which is like system change and real system change. This isn't just a matter, I talk about this a lot when people talk about things like trauma-informed approaches and talk about the fact that, you don't just become trauma-informed because you do a little bit of a professional development and suddenly you have a different lens on, like trauma-informed is about changing the entire culture, not just, not just towards kids, not just, it's everything and towards staff and towards everything that we do. But, that system change is really important, but it's hard. Systems are resistant to change. But, I would say that, you probably know, as most of our viewers do, how I feel about the word compliance. I think a lot of terrible things happen in the name of compliance. I think that sometimes we are resistant to change in the name of compliance. And what we need out there are some good troublemakers, people making good trouble.
Absolutely.
Because we need to question things that aren't working. We need to question things that are harmful.
100%.
And we need to, it's not just a matter of saying, like, let's get the pitchfork and question and then let's collaborate and fix them. Let's come together and fix problems. And there we begin to make progress. Yeah. All right. A couple more comments keep rolling in here. Nicole said, yes, PD desperately needed on trauma-informed schools. Absolutely. Let's see. Marion says, my job is to support teams, support adults. Yep. And then kind of related to that last question. Nicole said, absolutely. How do we change mindsets? I witnessed staff that thought seclusion was the best way to get compliance from students. Well, we need to move away from that compliance piece right away. And it's not easy. Nicole, I know you've been doing this work for some time and are one of those people out there really pushing change. I think we continue to do it. And I think, the other thing we have to do with this, and, I'm interested in your thoughts here, Jamie, but I look at this, if you were to look at the entire problem as a whole, you would give up because it seems unfixable. But sometimes, it's a matter of like, let's focus on the thing in front of us. Let's focus on a win here. I'm always reminded of that story about the starfish on the beach, right? Where, a kid's walking along the beach and sees all these starfish that are washed up, and he picks one up and he tosses it back in the water. And, somebody comes along and says, what are you doing? And the kid's like, well, there was a storm and all these starfish, washed up, and I'm trying to save them. And the adult says, well, you're never going to save them all. There's too many of them. You're not going to make a difference. The kid tosses another one back in and says, I made a difference to that one, right? Sometimes just, where we can make these changes, the more people that are doing that, the more we're going to start to build some momentum. And like you noted earlier, some of that's starting to happen. I think there is more momentum. The fact that,
100%.
yeah.
But again, you know, Guy, I think it's also about the mindset of the onlooker too. And I think that, you know, that negative bias, right? We're going to look out for what's working.
Right.
You know, we can naturally explain that through the evolution of human beings, okay? But when we're looking at the sort of things that we're talking about here, and I go back to positive psychology and the use of character strengths. You know, let's spend a bit of time actually doing strength spotting. Let's spot the positive things that are happening, because there'd always be positive things that are happening. And maybe if we focused more on those strengths and spent more energy on developing those strengths, then we're going to kind of change that mindset in a slightly more intentional way. And the reason I say that is because, you know, as a practitioner myself, I find that the use of character strengths, strength spotting, plus many other of the exercises and things that we can do around that derive from positive psychology. It doesn't mean that, you know, we don't acknowledge that, you know, we're not living in 100% positive world, because that's not the case. But actually, there's a lot more positive things going on, and we can actually work on that and develop it. So we don't necessarily have to take a confrontational approach. And I suppose, in a sense, that's a systemic self-regulation that I learned from my brother. I've done plenty of fighting about it. I've been very oppositional. I've caused lots of people lots of problems because I'm a campaigner. But I think the biggest effect that I've been able to achieve is by taking a more positive leadership approach as to an oppositional campaigning one.
Sure. Yeah, and you know, I mean, I guess I would say to some extent, maybe it takes a lot of different kinds of approaches at times.
Absolutely.
You know, there's a time and a place for everything. I mean, sometimes opposition can get people to the table, but ultimately that's what you need to do, is get them to the table to have a conversation. So, you know, I've been in situations where on one hand, I'm trying to apply pressure, and on the other hand, I'm saying, hey, come here, let's talk about this. And sometimes that works, right? But it certainly is not easy. And, but I think the other important thing, and you mentioned this point earlier, persistence. But it can be really tough. And Chantel brings up a great point here. I think she says, one of the biggest problems that comes about changing mindset is that the ones that are speaking out are advocating for change are still being victimized or losing their jobs. So a lot of people are afraid to speak up because of the retaliation or I mean, you know, I don't know how much more you can get into. I mean, I don't recall the story of the car on fire before, but I mean, you know, that's it's hard to believe. But I also come from the mindset that the more of us that begin to do it, the less likely some of that becomes. And maybe it's just my wishful thinking, but you know, when more people begin to speak out, I think it becomes harder to.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I'm wishful thinking with you there, Guy.
There you go. So Aaron says, we have no oversight or accountability when it comes to restraint and seclusion. My son was restrained and the school refused to speak to me about it and denied it even, though I have video. Filed a complaint with the state, and they refused to investigate because he was only 4, and they said they have a hard time proving it. Again, I have video of the incident. It's so sad that we can't do anything about this. And Aaron, don't give up. And if we can help, reach out.
Don't give up. Persevere.
Yeah, absolutely. Nicole says, I make a lot of good trouble. Well, you know, that's good. You got company here. And Chantel says, I feel like our book studies have done that. So we've been doing some book studies at the Alliance, brought some of us in that positive, proactive realm. Yeah, and that's a great point as well. I mean, kind of shifting into that. You know, it was as you were saying that, it was kind of making me think about that idea that what we think influences what we do. what we do
Yeah.
influences the way others think about themselves and perceive themselves. And of course, what they think about themselves influences their actions. So,
Yeah.
we actually have so much connection here to all of this. And I think that's really important to realize,
Yeah.
how much a change that we make can go
Yeah.
downstream and affect others in a
100%.
positive way.
And I Guy, I forgot to mention, and I'd just like to mention this for people. I referenced about strengths-based approaches. I referenced about well-being and PERMA model, and I've particularly referenced, kind of around the practices of things like strength spotting, character strengths, kindness, and so on. Now, on the 22nd of March, Ryan Nemick from the Via Character Institute, which is based in the US, but Ryan is a world eminent practitioner. In fact, he last year or the year before got a very distinguished award from the International Institute of Positive Psychology. Now, on the I think it's the 22nd of March, Ryan Nemick and JD Lee, who is from Oxford University here in the UK, they're doing the first seminar on the use of character strengths in the field of for people with autism, autistic, and intellectual developmental disabilities. I think that's going to be I think it's like 2 hours. It's free, and I'm certainly going to be tuning into that. That there's going to be some good stuff talked about and good opportunities for networking. So 22nd of March.
That's fantastic. And I was seeing if I could find the link real quick while and I haven't found it, but if you would, after the program, if you would share it with me, I'll make sure that we share it with our community and our audience as well. I appreciate you bringing that up. So we're kind of coming up to time here, so we're going to have to wrap this up in a moment or so. But I do want to say, if anybody has any final comments or questions, if you want to put those in the chat, you're welcome to put those in chat, and we'll try to address a couple of those before we wrap up. But I really appreciate, your, and again, your positive energy here, your, kind of balance. I mean, to go through, and again, back to the trauma, to experience the things that we experience, and to come back with the persistence and the positive outlook on how we can influence change. I really appreciate that. I appreciate, what you've been doing, and I know others, kind of struggle with that as well, but do want to just say I really appreciate that. Have a comment here from Jennifer that says, I struggle with my own grief associated with school trauma that my daughter has experienced. It's also a grief response. Yeah.
Sure.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So as we're wrapping up here, I always like to give, the guests an opportunity. Any final thoughts that you want to share with us, or anything you want to leave us with today as we're kind of wrapping things up here?
Sure. Well, firstly, words of appreciation. I'm very grateful. So that's the first thing. And I'm also grateful for people that have tuned in. And I guess to close, the subject matter that I've covered, and the stuff that people have raised in their questions and comments, these are difficult areas. And, I think, again, relying upon character strengths, have hope, have courage, have authenticity, and develop teamwork and leadership, and we'll get there. We'll get there.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean,
don't give up.
Yeah, certainly, as you pointed out, there's progress being made. There's.
Sure.
I feel really fortunate, and you mentioned a number of people here today, but to know and be able to collaborate and work alongside people that are out there that are doing some amazing work. I really think there's, and what's fantastic is just the genuineness and the openness to connection and doing things that are out there. So, I want to thank you for the work that you're doing, that you've been doing through your career, and of course the opportunity to connect with you about this. And thank you so much for being here today. A couple quick things to share as we're wrapping up here. Chantel said, "Yes, we will. Thank you so much for your presentation." Marion said, "Thank you so much." Absolutely, I think people appreciate this, and hopefully we'll tune in as we're having further conversations. We'll have to keep this going. So I just want to thank you again for being here today, and thank our audience for joining on. You can hang on for a second. We're going to let everybody else go, and we're gonna wrap up our broadcast here. But thank you so much, all of you that are part of this community. I think together we can continue to work and make progress. And I know it's not easy, but know that you're not alone. Know that there's a lot of other people out there that are pulling in the same direction. And together we're going to do some great things. So thanks so much. Thank you, Jamie. And you can hang on, and we'll let everybody else go here. Bye-bye.
Cheers, everybody.